No one ever believed these kind of situations 17 years ago. It was disheartening back then, and it's disheartening now. I'm 31 now, but I was a teen when I was walking home the sunny day that this happened. It was winter, but winter in Florida is just a nice cool breeze. I remember holding a Tupperware in my hand that was still hot, containing pasta and broccoli my grandma had just made. It was so cool living one block away from my grandma because a quick 10-minute walk meant I got some really good leftovers. In between my house and her house was a patch of woods, but thorns and ticks prevented me from taking a shortcut through. I remember looking down at the sidewalk just as I reached the middle of the patch of woods to my right. I heard someone ask,
"Hey, where are you going?"
I looked up and to my left, towards the road. A thin man in a white van with his window rolled down smiled at me. He was driving the opposite direction of the way I was walking. I simply said, "Home," and continued to walk. He started to say,
Hey,
so I looked back to see him hanging out of his driver window.
I'll give you a ride home. Come here."
He says. I keep walking and loudly say, "No thanks." I stopped and turned around when I heard him drive away. I began walking again, creeped out, wishing that the woods didn't run so long next to the sidewalk. I remember wishing I was home already. I was super alert now, hearing every critter in the brush to my right, rustling leaves and scurrying about. I picked up my pace, reminding myself that those woods were packed with lizards. I said it to myself out loud. It's just lizards running around, silly. But then I hear a vehicle coming up behind me. Out of fear I look back, and to my horror it's the same white van with the man still smiling. The van slows down next to me, and a big, angry-looking man flung open the side door and jumped out. I turned to my right and began running as fast as I could into the woods. I was jumping over bushes and long vines, clenching my grandma's Tupperware for dear life. I looked back once, and the thick brush of the woods was slowing the big man down. I just knew going straight I would reach my backyard guarded by a chain-link fence. I remember the thorns and sticks slicing my skin, but I couldn't feel the pain. I just kept thinking, run! Once I reached the fence, I chucked the Tupperware. I hoisted myself over, ripping my jeans. I face-planted onto the ground on the other side with a loud thud. I ran onto my porch and began banging the back door. My dad let me in and I was literally panicking, covered in dirt and cuts, trying to lock the back door. I felt safe to be back home with my dad and our Rottweilers. Dad sat me down and started questioning me and immediately called the cops. The cops arrived, only 2 of them, and took a report. They said nothing like that happened in this area before, and one even told me lying for attention was against the law. I remember they left, and my dad swore he believed me, that I could sleep in his room that night if I wanted. I remember feeling really sad and frustrated about not being believed and going to bed without even eating the pasta with broccoli. It was hard to sleep or go anywhere for months after that because I was scared the men were still out there. My dad ended up getting me a cell phone and installing an alarm system to help me feel safe. I still have issues being alone to this day. To the men that tried to abduct me that day, let's never meet again. Even though this happened when I was about 2 years old, I can relive it in my head like it was yesterday. This was also one of the first things I remember. I was at a family Italian restaurant with just my mum as my dad was on a business trip to England. The memory is so vivid I can even remember that it was a Wednesday night and I had just finished my spaghetti. It was family night and the restaurant had brought in a clown to dance and make balloon animals for the kids. He was over at the other side of the room doing the chicken dance with 5 or 6 other kids. I begged my mum to let me go dance with the clown and she finally caved. I ran over there and started doing my thing, flailing my arms around, etc. But then the clown stopped dancing. He looked at me for a few seconds. At that time I was unable to sense malice in another human being, but his face burns in my brain. After thinking about it as an adult, I'll just say that the face he gave me wasn't going to just make me a balloon animal. After a few seconds, he walks calmly over to me and picks me up. After bouncing me up and down a few times to make sure I wasn't going to scream for my parents, he breaks into a sprint and runs out the door. Lucky for me, and unlucky for the clown, my mum had been watching me the whole time. She also happened to be a powerlifter in high school and had also been kickboxing for years. She grabbed me and slammed his face off of a car door, but while she was checking on me, the clown ran off into the night. I'll never know if it was just the chaos of the moment or fear, but for some reason my mum didn't call the cops, and I never saw him again. These days, I usually tell the story for laughs or occasionally in a game of truth or dare. I've never let my friends know how the story haunts me. I can't count the number of nights I didn't sleep thinking about how close I came to unspeakable things happening to me. How close I came to being found in a dumpster a few days after. How close I came to being another one of the clowns I can only assume many young victims. As I get older, the more dangerous I realize the situation was. It's been 17 years since it happened, and I still think about it. Dear clown, if you're seeing this, I'm the kid that got away. One day when I was a kid, my father and I went to a local restaurant. For the sake of not tainting the name, I won't use the restaurant's actual name. I'll call it Sino's for now. My father and I ordered the same thing, a country fried steak. Being the small thing that I was, I couldn't finish my order. With my dad's permission, I went to play on the nearby arcade games they had at the restaurant while he ate. There had been a particular stuffed animal on the claw machine that I had my eyes on since I walked into the restaurant. It was a weird purple/pink sheep rat thing. I wasted quarters in that machine trying to get the damn thing. Can't say exactly when, but sometime along the way an old man started watching me. I can't recall too much of his appearance other than he wore a light blue collared shirt, had a head full of white hair with maybe a few black and grey strands left, and wasn't feeble looking despite being old. It was like he just happened to grey early. He noticed me getting frustrated, and while I can't recite what he said verbatim, he essentially asked me if he could try. He got the stuffed animal I was trying to get in his first go. As simple as it was, I was amazed by that, and he asked if I wanted it. I said that I wanted it, and then he told me he had more for me to choose from. According to what I can remember, he claimed that he would often go around to claw machines to get stuffed animals, and he'd donate them to charity. For that reason, he had many of them in his car. Now, I can't be sure how valid his claims were, but being the idiot I was as a kid, I didn't question it a single bit. I was still interested in that rat-sheep thing, but he insisted I go check out the others. I don't recall him ever being aggressive about it, but I still gave in quickly. Then that old man and I proceeded to walk out of the restaurant. Now for the only smart move I made in the whole thing. As we walked out, I let us out so we could pass my dad. As we passed him, I said something along the lines of, "Hey Dad, I'm going to go with this man to get a stuffed animal." A minor thing about me, even today I have some trouble controlling my volume. Even though I think I said it, I probably shouted it. Me saying that could have also brought the attention of many other bystanders. I can't quite recall how my dad responded, but he didn't reject since I would have not continued if that were the case. Or at the very least he didn't vocalize his rejection. He was a bit of a large man, so getting out of the booth seats was a challenge for him, making it hard for him to physically stop me. My poor dad was probably panicking if that was the case. Regardless, my dad knew his face, and so did the bystanders who turned to my loud voice. If this old man was a child predator, then that incriminating evidence may have been the only thing to save what was left of my purity, and maybe my life. We walked outside to his car. I can't recall every single detail, but I remember it being on the smaller side and dark in colour. With the stuffed animal I wanted still in his hands, he opened the trunk to reveal a large white trash bag. I remember there were other things in there along with the trash bag, but I didn't pay much attention to it. Opening the bag, he revealed that it was in fact full of stuffed animals. I still made the slightly better decision to not get too close to the trunk, but I still looked at the stuffed animals on the surface. None of them interested me, and I still wanted that rat-sheep thing. I expressed that, and then he gave it to me. He then drove off about as quickly as I ran to my dad with the stuffed animal I wanted. It was only until recently that I realized why my father hasn't taken me to Seno's since. Potential child predator at Seno's, let's not meet again. So, a bit of background on this lady. She lived across the street from my dad while he grew up. They are around the same age, 40, and basically grew up together. She's always been a bit creepy though. This isn't the only story I have of her. I have many, many more of this deranged lady I'll call R. My brother and I were outside. It was summer and I was 13 at the time. My brother was 2. My dad and stepmom were outside and we were just kicking a ball around. At this point, I had moved out of her house and we hadn't seen her for 2 years. She hadn't met my little brother yet and I didn't expect to see her until I heard rap music being blasted down the street. I looked up and saw R's dirty, beaten up red pickup truck coming down the road. My dad had warned me to stay away from R, so I quickly picked up my little brother to go back inside. But she saw us. She pulled up in our driveway and began digging around in her car for her glasses. I acted impulsively and just hid in the bush on the side of our house. I was absolutely terrified and I covered my brother's mouth. I got out of the car and began pacing around the front yard, calling my name. She said she had candy and wanted to give it to me. I was petrified as I had only come in contact with this lady a couple of times and I didn't know how to react. At this point, my dad came outside because of the yelling from R. He looked stunned to see R as she hadn't been around for a while. He began making conversation with her and eventually told her she had to leave. She said that she wanted to take me to her trailer in the next town over. My dad declined and told her again to leave. She did after a few more minutes of convincing. We got out of the bush and my dad didn't blame me for hiding from her. That was the last time I ever saw R. I still wonder what she's doing today, if she is even still alive. This happened when I was in 1st grade. After school, I had to take the bus as we lived a bit too far for me to get dropped off and picked up each day. I would usually get dropped off by the bus on a random street near a different school with a bunch of kids and my grandma would be there waiting. The street couldn't be seen from that school, however, and it was basically just a random street with no real places around. There were some houses, but they were behind walls, so they couldn't see this street. It was a great place to grab someone and not be seen. One day, my uncle had borrowed the car and was supposed to come pick me up. I didn't know this at the time, so I was confused as to why my grandma wasn't there. Since this was back in the day when little kids didn't have cell phones, I had no way to call her and see what was going on. I was stuck there pacing back and forth since my uncle was late. All of the cars left except one, but I didn't pay it much attention. Even the kids that would walk home from the bus stop were gone at this point. About 10 minutes later, a car pulls up. I can still remember this car because for some reason it had patches of cloth on it in random places as if they were trying to make a quilted car. An older lady gets out of the car and starts walking towards me as I'm still pacing back and forth. I see her and stop, and then suddenly I heard a voice behind me asking that lady what she was doing. Without taking her eyes off of me, the lady said, "Oh, my daughter called and told me my granddaughter was pacing back and forth on this street and for me to come pick her up." By this time, the voice from behind me was next to me, and I saw that it was my friend's mum. She put her arm around me and told the lady that I was the only one there and that I was with her. The crazy lady glared at us for a second before storming off to her car and driving away quickly. It turns out the car that was sitting there the whole time was my friend and her mum, and she was watching to make sure I got picked up. She took me to her car and had me call her grandma to ask if it was okay for her to take me home. If it hadn't been for her staying around to make sure I got picked up, I could be living a very different life right now. So thank you to her, and lady with the ugly car, let's not meet again.